I'm Jim Roberts. I'm chair of the Battle of Franklin Trust, and I'd like to welcome all of you today to this wonderful event. Before I introduce Eric Jacobson, I want to just pause a minute and tell you that my wife Margaret and I have been in our home on Adams Street, less than a mile from here, for 46 years now. We've seen a transformation of this property from the strip center that was here and adorned by the beautiful Domino's Pizza several years ago, and then across Claiborne Street, the Red Roof Pizza Hut, of all things. So the transformation of that is just astounding. And then when I look forward across the street and think in a few years it'll be open space when all those buildings are gone, it will be a tremendous view for all of us. Last week, second thing I want to talk about, the last few days we've been in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, where we were participating in the graduation ceremonies with a grandson who graduated from Southern Methodist this weekend. And in the dean's remarks from the business school, he talked about and charged those graduates to commit themselves to the life of whatever community that they lived in. Not just their work, but their commitment. And I thought during those remarks that that's exactly what we have had and seen in our time in Franklin, Tennessee, and what we see today. Without the collaborative efforts of Battle of Franklin Trust and Franklin's Charge and all the other community events around here that are spurred on by either Leadership Franklin or Franklin Tomorrow, and the collaboration that you see with the city and the county and all of the different organizations, we are in a wonderful place. And it's hopefully that we can all continue to enjoy that from time to time. So with that, all of that said, I'd like to now introduce Eric Jacobson, who's no stranger to, I think, any of you here. He is the CEO of the Battle of Franklin Trust. He's been overseeing and the spearhead of 3 houses that the trust manages throughout the area. He's been with the trust for any number of years, and he is certainly the face of the trust in all that it does. So, Eric?
I'm also doubling as the audio person, so can everybody hear me? All right, good? So I've been thinking for the last few hours what to say, and I guess I should start with, I've never done anything like this before. Today is really an incredible day, not just for Franklin, but for the history of this town and for the battlefield that we have worked for well over 20 years. In fact, in some ways, probably 25 plus years to reclaim a battlefield lost to time, deemed by Congress in the early 1990s to be of such a category that it was essentially completely lost. So we have defied all of the odds. And when I say we, as Jim mentioned, it is a large group of different organizations, but a myriad of individuals, not just in Franklin and in Tennessee, but all across the nation. So I'll have a few words later on where we're going to talk about what happened here on November 30th, 1864, and why this monument is such an important and worthy addition to these efforts and to this ground and to the history of what happened in the United States between 1861 and 1865. But we have several people that we have invited, honored guests who have much to say about this, and I would like to start with one of our biggest supporters, a person who understood the importance of the Battle of Franklin and the Tennessee campaign, I think long before many people, Dr. Carroll Van West. And I have known Van as long as I have been here. He is the state historian and the director of the Center for Historic Preservation at MTSU in Murfreesboro. Van has been a steadfast supporter. He has helped move funds in our direction. In fact, all of the interpretive signage that you'll see behind you and west of Columbia Pike, as well as on the battlefield at Carton, all through the efforts of Van and his support. So without further ado, Dr. West.
Good afternoon, friends and colleagues from across Tennessee, and a special welcome to our guests and friends from Texas. That's what I want to talk about, Texas and Tennessee. On this very spot, November 30, 1864, Tennesseans and Texans linked arms, linked souls, and marched into battle. Those links had already had deep roots, connections that too often Tennesseans forget, but never Texans. The gathering of the defenders of the Alamo counted 31 Tennesseans among the 200 Texans, Mexican Texans, and the dozen or so states and nations represented there. Among those was one of our most dedicated, one of our most beloved sons, David Crockett. David and those Tennesseans and all the others fought and perished together, March the 6th, 1836. And they perished, though, with one common hope. Have we given Houston enough time? They had. Once governor of Tennessee, Sam Houston, 6 weeks later, subdued the enemy. A man who once left his East Tennessee mountain home to live among the Cherokee would soon be the first president of the Republic of Texas, then a governor of Texas as a state. The only person to ever serve as governor of two states, Tennessee and Texas, Sam Houston, is one of those links. Just a bit later came the historian to record those deeds. Yet another Tennessean from the mountains of Hawkins County, a West Pointer who had served in the Tennessee Senate and as mayor of Murfreesboro before finding his calling as a historian. His name, I'm sure the Texans know. If Tennesseans do, good. It's Henderson Yoakum. A name that Texans know because he wrote the first textbook, the first history of the Republic of Texas. He was Houston's neighbor in Huntsville, Texas. He went there from Murfreesboro because he despaired of the politics and the divisions of the time in Rutherford County. I'm glad he ended up next to Houston. They worked together to tell that story, to record those facts, and they still inspire us today. So there's 3 links among many: a defender, a governor, a scholar. 3 Tennesseans who bind our states together, just as this monument behind me will bind us today. We welcome the delegation of our Texas friends, mindful that the links of our shared past are permanent, marked again by this monument. It's a permanent reminder and ready for generations to come to embrace and cherish our shared heritage and the links between Tennessee and Texas.
Thank you, Dr. West. Our next guest is Stephen Cure. I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Cure during the process of the monument, really from the beginning of the monument being discussed, but specifically its design, its creation, its text. And then as we stood right here and dug into the earth to create the base for the monument and to see it installed, and we got a little sneak peek before we covered it up for today's events. Mr. Cure is the programs coordinator for the Texas Historical Commission's military and oral history. And I can tell you through the years, having met a lot of people who know a lot of history about Texas, I think Stephen is right there at the top with his vast knowledge. So please welcome him.
We Texans are known to claim many things, but I'm enough Texan to know not to claim vast knowledge of Texas history. That'll get you in trouble. Thank you, Eric. Eric Jacobson and the staff of the Battle of Franklin Trust have been exemplary partners in helping shepherd this monument through to fruition. Thank you for your efforts to reclaim and preserve and interpret this battlefield for current and future generations. I'd also like to thank Julian and Emily with Franklin's Charge for their efforts in organizing today's events. Chairman Now, thank you for your leadership in battlefield preservation, your support for THC's Texas Civil War Monuments Project, and for your generous monetary support that made this monument possible. I'd also like to thank the Commission's staff leadership, the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission, and fellow colleagues for their support in erecting this monument. Particularly have with us today as part of our Texas delegation, our interim executive director, Joseph Bell, and my division director back there in the back, Charles Sadnick. He's the director of the History Programs Division. Thank you for being here, gentlemen. My sincerest thanks also go to the historians who reviewed and assisted in refining the content you'll find on this monument. Michael Smith from McNeese State University, Charles Greer from Central Texas College, John Lundberg from Tarrant County College, and of course, as Eric mentioned, Eric Jacobson from the Battle of Franklin Trust. Thank you for your time and effort in refining the content of this monument. Last but not least, thanks to all of you for being here on what was a threatening rainy afternoon and coming on out. And thank you for being here for this dedication of the 20th Texas Civil War Monument. Efforts by the state of Texas to memorialize the contributions of Texans on the nation's Civil War battlefields first materialized in 1961 with the Texas Memorial at Vicksburg, Mississippi. It was followed by 13 additional markers, like the one you're about to see today, on other battlefields where significant numbers of Texans fought. In the mid-2000s, the Texas Historical Commission re-engaged this effort and has now placed 6 additional privately funded monuments on battlefields in Kentucky, Mississippi, Virginia, and now Tennessee. This monument joins 2 others in Tennessee at Shiloh and Fort Donelson. If you're interested in a full list of those, you can find those on the Texas Historical Commission's website. Why we're here today. The Texans who fought here were no strangers to combat. Since 1862, when many of their regiments were formed, they fought on many of the battlefields where these monuments now stand. Fort Donelson, Pea Ridge, Raymond, Corinth, Vicksburg, Chickamauga, Kennesaw Mountain, and many others that do not have one of these markers. By November of 1864, they knew all too well the carnage of battle. Let's take Granbury's Texas Brigade, who fought on this very ground, as an example. By the time they reached Franklin, the remnants of 8 regiments totaled roughly 1,100 men. That's nearly 8,000 officers and men who, due to death, injury, disease, and many other causes, were reduced to only 1,100. On this field, 400 more, over 1/3, would be dead, injured, or captured, including their commander, Brigadier General Hiram Granbury, who lie dead just over there near the Columbia Pike. Brigadier General Saul Ross's brigade would take significant casualties as well in its operations on the eastern flank of the battle. Douglas's battery, supporting General John Brown's division, another future governor of the state we're in now,
Right.
on the west side of the Columbia Pike, would also suffer losses, including its commander. But after this battle, the Texans who fought here would go on to Nashville, where they would fight, and then on to North Carolina and Mississippi before their eventual surrender less than 6 months later. The surviving men who fought here, both blue and gray, would eventually return home, many of them scarred from years of fighting. They returned to their homes and families, though they were tied together by a common bond that only those who have been through the crucible of combat can fully grasp. They worked to improve their communities and pressed the settlements in Texas further westward. Some rose to heights of political office, like General Saul Ross, who would later become governor of Texas. Others would choose to remember their leaders during the war by naming new communities in their honor, like Granbury in Hood County and Cleburne in Johnson County, among many others. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Miss Sandra Neely, who is the chair of the Johnson County Historical Commission. She and her husband James are with us here today. You might be thinking, Johnson, I don't recognize that name. I know the other three. Middleton Tate Johnson, no T, raised the 14th Texas Cavalry Regiment, which was actually part of Ector's brigade that arrived here late on November the 30th. They were still on the way when the battle took place. So 4 people whose roots passed through Franklin with names on Texas counties and communities. So in late March, Eric mentioned we met several times.
So
I was sitting on that bench right over there on a clear, cool morning, waiting on the crew to arrive to install the footing from the monument behind me. And I took a couple of photos of the cannons over there and was contemplating how to describe what I was doing here to a very diverse group of friends on social media. Some who fervently support and many who oppose monuments that they see as glorifying the Confederacy. As one reads the text on this monument, they should easily see that it is a monument to the men that Texas sent here to fight. It honors their courage and sacrifice, as well as all who fought here in both blue and gray. This place and this monument serve as a place of reflection and a reminder of the very high price that is to be paid when we as a nation are unable to resolve our differences through civil discourse and compromise, and instead turn to the force of arms. It is my sincerest hope that the people of Franklin and visitors to this battlefield can appreciate the actions of these Texans and learn from our shared past through this monument. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, very much for that history lesson and also a reminder of why places like this and monumentation are so important, and I think as important in the 21st century as they were in the 19th century when many of them were first erected. Our next speaker, again, one of our great supporters, and when you're a politician, it's easy to follow the winds of what may be popular. And I can assure you, having watched Mayor Ken Moore through the years, he has done things that have made him decidedly unpopular, which makes him such a great mayor. He has supported our efforts here, and he has stood up for what is right and just in many different ways. I could not be more proud to call Ken a member of our historic community. Mayor Moore.
Eric, thank you. You've taken away my entire opportunity to speak because I'm kind of speechless at this moment. But I can tell you first that I'm not a historian, but I do want to take this opportunity to recognize all the people who have had to deal with us reclaiming battlefield land. So that's on the commissions and the Battle Franklin Trust and so on and so forth. So if you're part of any of those groups, please raise your hand. Thank you. And we have a number of elected officials here today, and two from the General Assembly. Senator Johnson is here, and Representative Sam Whitson. Both of those have had significant impact on our community as far as reclaiming battlefield. And then, of course, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. I noticed several aldermen here. I noticed Alderman Peterson, Alderman Baggett, and Alderman Caesar. If I missed anybody that snuck in, I apologize. So, again, let me say I am not a historian, but I get the significance of why we're here today on this very special occasion and all this in this very, very special area of our city. I would urge you to look in the brochure that you were given on the right-hand side of the page. That tells a big story about the energy in this community to salvage battlefield land and be noted so well nationally for what we're doing. So I applaud all of those that have had something to do with that. I appreciate those comments trying to link how Texas and Tennessee are similar. It's a lot more than just the T's in the state name. I like to say that a lot of our rootstock we sent down to Texas to help them. But I'm not going to get in an argument with our friends from Texas right now. And I appreciate Stephen Cure speaking about the Texans that fought here. But in particular, what little tidbit of history that I learned is that Hiram Granberry was a lawyer. He was a judge and a general that commanded a regiment here. And you just heard him speak about it. But as he was dying on the battlefield, supposedly, he told his men, "Forward, men, forward." I think that's so appropriate today as we learn from our past, as we look to the future. So I wouldn't put men there. I would put forward, Franklin, forward. Let's continue to grow this effort and continue to be recognized for the success we're having. So thanks for the opportunity.
And now for, I guess we could say the guest of the hour. Before I introduce John now, a few personal comments about a relationship that we have cultivated with John over the last couple of years. Some of you will be attending a dinner in John's honor after this, but for those of you who will not, this is really intended for you to know a little bit of how we make the sausage, about how we make a monument, and how we get it placed. The American Battlefield Trust held its annual conference in this area 2 years ago. And John met with Julian Bibb, who many of you know as the master puppeteer behind the scenes, pulling all the strings that have made this happen, and Sam Whitson. And I know Sam is standing right back here, and Mike Granger. Look, all three of you, as you were that afternoon. And when I first saw John, they had him on the ground with his arm behind his back. And they were picking his pocket. As Jim Lighthizer likes to remind people, that's what we do to certain donors. That evening, during the day, I was running around doing an all-day battlefield tour with Gary Edelman, as, you know, that's what we do. So that evening, I ended up back at the hotel, and who's sitting at the bar but John now? So we shared a certain amount of alcohol, which I won't tell you how much, but it was enough over the course of the next hour or two. I don't remember how long it went on, but we discussed a monument. And that was, in many ways, where this started. And we were talking about the ground on the west side of the road, which we're pushing to save, but then started to talk about the ground here on the east side, where the Texans of Granberry's brigade fought and what would be an appropriate location. So, with that as an intro, I would like first to introduce John Now. And as soon as John gets up from the chair, Stephen and John will head over to the monument. And so before his remarks begin, we're going to unveil the Texas Monument. And I want to take a moment for everyone in attendance. Do not ever forget this day. There has never been a monument on the battlefield of Franklin, Tennessee, except for a memorial to Patrick Clayborn, which barely existed for a dozen or so years before it was removed. It was torn down for the construction of a house, which quite ironically we bought and tore down. And now it has come full circle to place a monument to Texas troops on this battlefield. So share this moment with us. John, Stephen.
What are we doing here? You're gonna come over here and pull this stuff apart.
Gonna rip it?
Just take it apart.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Well done. Oh, thanks. Well, good afternoon. I am John Now, and I want to tell you all, first time I came here was a family spring trip. I grew up in Chicago. We were in, it was either 1958 or 59. And I came to this spot expecting to see what I would see in other battlefields. And I'll never forget the disappointment, so that today we can begin to support the work that you all have done to reclaim a battlefield, to talk about what exactly happened and why so many men on both sides, this was their last sight. I'm here as the chairman of the Texas Historical Commission and as a supporter of battlefield preservation. I want to take just a second. The guy that talked me into this, which means he's a great salesman and I'm probably not the smartest listener. Where's Jim Lighthizer? Jim? Thank you, Jim, for everybody. Well, today, Texas and Texans remember our fallen for their courage and service to the Lone Star State. Just like Tennessee, the Civil War had just an immense impact on our state. It uprooted thousands of Texans. They fought, they bled throughout the Civil War. It's not about glorifying war. Many of us have worn uniforms. It's about remembering the why. In Texas, that's important. The valor, sacrifice, and their memory are worth preserving. One of the ways we do that is in books. Another way is on the ground where they fought, but what they believed in, men on both sides. These stories tell the drama of back and forth in this battle, and as you heard, these similar monuments are around other battle sites. It talks about the bravery, about the endurance, the savagery of the fighting, and the momentous impact that this battle had on the outcome of the Western Front in the Civil War. It's those events that make it worthy of commemoration and remembrance as we are doing today. What is the Texas Historical Commission? Well, we're the agency of the state government that protects our assets, our historic assets. We tell the stories of the history of Texas, but more importantly, the people that made the state. And in that context, we believe that telling this story at Franklin is well worth preserving. There's no question. You can argue both sides of the American Civil War, as we have learned in the last few years. But battlefields and the battles of the Civil War influenced the U.S. history, and it influenced world history. The Americans fought on both sides. I had a great-great-grandfather in a Massachusetts unit that lost an arm at Antietam. He goes back to Massachusetts, heals up, and with one arm goes back into the Union Army and fights in 5 more battles in Florida and South Carolina. They were a different breed, but they were motivated the same way that our sons and daughters are motivated today to wear the uniform and protect the values of our country. Battlegrounds like the one here in Franklin are preserved and accompanied by interpretation and education. It tells the story. It illuminates what these men did. The Texas Historical Commission is proud to have this monument and others all over the U.S. Back in the Civil War centennial, our Centennial Commission for the state of Texas initiated a series of these granite monuments. People have asked me, where did this granite come from? It's interesting. This one and all the previous ones, to include the giant monument at Vicksburg, are made of the same sunset red Texas granite that was originally used to construct the Texas state capitol. And if next time you go down to Austin, take a look, because that is exactly the same granite. The commission, while we strive to preserve the stories of the state of Texas and its history, we have historic sites that date back not just to the Civil War, but although it's not the Alamo, we have a number of sites. I tell people, well, I hope there's no reporters here. At the end of the day, the Texans lost. Yeah, there were Tennesseans at the Alamo. Well, we didn't win that one. We won at a place called San Jacinto. And today, we are working and building a world-class visitor center to tell the story of what actually took place after the Alamo. Our historic sites date back to before the Civil War. We have General Sam Bell Maxey's house, Confederate reunion grounds right outside Dallas. We have a great history. This is an unpaid-for plug. Come on now. Some of your folks came down here about 150 years ago, and it's a good place to visit and see and learn a little bit about Texas history. Today, I'm going to conclude by saying thank you. It's easy to think about a battlefield. For those of you that stood here 20 years ago and then fought, I guess it was a convenience store, a gas station, a chicken joint, and you have absolutely reclaimed land that's historic and it's memorable. Yes, it will bring tourists. And yes, battlefields are an economic development driver. But most importantly, they tell about the character of Americans that'll fight when they're pushed, and they'll fight hard. I really, really thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Texas. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, John. And thank you not only for the vision, but for your generosity. What has not been said is that John has contributed a significant financial sum, not just to this effort, but to the ground on the west side of the road, which, as you know, we are in the process. Franklin's Charge has secured one piece of property, has closed on another, and we are soon to conclude and hopefully close on the deal that will see that long cinder block building that has stood at Columbia and Strahl for a long time removed.
All right.
And that itself will be a day, because we do share this common bond. I remember seeing the battlefield, well, it wasn't 1958, but it was about 1998. And I remember standing out there somewhere and looking back in this direction and trying to find Carter House, and you couldn't see it. You know, it was just all covered up. And to see this park and now this monument take shape has been wonderful. A few closing thoughts. Just listen. It's quiet.
Good.
You know, there's the occasional, traffic that you can hear from Columbia Avenue, but this park has changed the atmosphere of this area. There was always, because there was commercial buildings, a few residential homes, but there was traffic in and out of all these places, buying pizza, buying this, buying that, buying flowers, checking in here, going there, pulling in, stopping at the light. There was so much more congestion and traffic in this immediate area just 10 or 12 years ago. But the quiet that you just heard, or that you can experience on any given day, is dramatically different than what was happening here on November 30th, 1864. 24 hours earlier, the Texans of Granbury's brigade, part of Patrick Cleburne's division, had come very close to blocking the Columbia Pike about 13 miles south of here, just on the outskirts of Spring Hill. In fact, Granbury's men probably got as close to the road as any of Cleburne's did that day. Those of you familiar with this story know that on that night, John Schofield's Federal Army escaped and marched all the way to Franklin. They arrived here in this area just before sunrise and began to establish a defensive position. The eastern part of that position is due south of us, and it ran east to Lewisburg Pike. The rest of the defensive line began west of Columbia Pike, snaked around to the southwest of Carter House, and out to the west side of town. And by about 3:30 that afternoon, the Confederate Army in rapid pursuit from Spring Hill had arrived just short of 2 miles south of here and were formed up. I had the honor of having lunch today with the Sons of Confederate Veterans Division Commander for Tennessee and Texas, and my good friend, Counselor Phillips. And we talked a little bit about that moment right before 4 o'clock, straight south of here. Cleburne's division, with Granbury on the front left, his left flank anchored on the road, were poised and ready to move. 3,000 men in the division. As Stephen mentioned earlier, Granbury had a little over 1,000, so he's about a third of the division. They, among others, were the shock troops of the Army of Tennessee. And as they advanced just after 4 o'clock, they advanced into a storm, the likes of which the men on both sides later said they had never experienced. The details of what happened on this ground are easily found. Some of it can be told on interpretive markers. There are certainly many books and online sources to tell you. But this was a kind of violence that shocked even the survivors. Granbury's men hit the breach, broke through the main line just south of here. By the time the Texans busted through the center, Granbury was probably already dead, as was Claiborne. Claiborne took a bullet to the chest. Granbury took a bullet straight through the head. The monument marks roughly the high water mark for the Texans. As they plowed through the main line, they began to run into reserve troops coming out of the ground behind us or behind me, swarming all over the Texans and killing and wounding and capturing as many as they could. Those who survived would later recount they couldn't believe they got out of it. Granbury's brigade was a wreck, as was Claiborne's division, which suffered close to 50% casualties across the board. Just to give you a sense of the kind of loss, within the brigade, the 5th Confederate commander, gone. The commander of the 6th and 15th Texas, gone. The commander of the 7th Texas, gone. The commander of the 10th Texas, gone. And the commander of the 7th, 18th, 24th, and 25th Texas Cavalry, gone. And the brigade commander, and the division commander. The Army of Tennessee was wrecked here, but it was not for lack of effort. And in many ways, that's what this monument also tells us about this last titanic struggle at the end of this long and terrible war. Yes, there was a Battle of Nashville 2 weeks later, but the Army of Tennessee in its spirit was wrecked and destroyed here. It was almost fait accompli 2 weeks later, because you simply could not replace men like Patrick Claiborne and Hiram Granbury. The marker also remembers other Texans like Sul Ross's cavalrymen in William Hicks Jackson's division of Forest Cavalry, which pushed east of the Harpeth River and encountered Federal cavalry there, but were pushed back across the Harpeth. Also Douglas's Texas Battery, rolling up either on or near Columbia Pike, firing what limited Confederate artillery there was into the Federal defenders. When the sun came up on December 1st, 1864, the survivors described a scene, as one man said, like a smoking holocaust of death and suffering. And the survivors had to bury their friends. And many of them are buried today in the McGavock Confederate Cemetery at Carnton. Texas blood was soaked into this soil, along with men from many other states, almost 160 years ago. This monument will forever remember their sacrifice. I want to thank all of you for attending. You have been part of something very special, and I want to thank all of you who have been a part of this effort through the years, because none of this was possible without your help and your support. Thank you very much.
Good.